The rain hadn't yet started, but the sky above Chicago carried the weight of an imminent storm. Thick grey clouds swirling with an almost theatrical menace. Selena stood under the canopy of a bus shelter near the loop, her oversized hoodie, soaked at the shoulders and her hands buried deep in the kangaroo pocket. The air was cold for spring, biting at her cheeks, but she welcomed the sting. It helped distract her from the weight in her chest. At 24, Selena had learned the price of silence. She had given up too much of it over the years, first for peace, then for survival. Raised in a working-class neighborhood by a mother who'd passed too young and a brother who gambled too much, Selena had been the responsible one by default. She worked 2 jobs, waitressing during the day and cleaning offices at night, while attending nursing school online whenever she could afford the tuition. Dreams for Selena were a luxury. What she had instead was duty, which was why she hadn't questioned Jared when he'd asked her to come with him that night. He'd shown up unexpectedly at the diner where she worked, pale and jittery, insisting she change and meet someone. "Dress nice," he'd said, "like real nice. I've got something lined up that could fix everything." She hadn't asked questions. Not because she trusted him, but because he was her brother, and in her world, family meant sacrifice. Now, standing alone in the lobby of the Lancaster Tower, the tallest building in the Chicago skyline, Selena felt entirely out of place. The marble floor beneath her sneakers gleamed like water, and the air smelled like money, like fresh-cut roses and understated perfume, nothing like the scent of bleach and old coffee she was used to. Jared reappeared from the elevator bank, tugging at the sleeves of his too small blazer. "He's ready, we're going up." Selena hesitated. "Who?" Jared didn't look at her. Damien Lancaster. The name landed like a stone in her stomach. Everyone in Chicago knew Damien Lancaster, the reclusive millionaire, the tech empire. Founder, the man who never gave interviews but whose face graced business magazines. Rumors swirled around him. Ruthless in the boardroom, dangerously private in real life, with a string of mysterious relationships that always ended in silence. "What, does he want with me?" she asked, already sensing the answer would shatter something fragile inside her. Jared finally looked at her. His face was tight with desperation. "He's going to help us. Help you. This is a good thing, Lena." She didn't believe him. But she stepped into the elevator anyway. The penthouse was silent when the doors slid open, but Selena felt the presence of someone powerful the moment she crossed the threshold. The space was massive. Glass walls revealing the glittering city below. Minimalist decor in shades of slate and cream. Everything too perfect to be real. Then she saw him. Damien Lancaster stood by the window, tall and lean in a tailored charcoal suit, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn when they entered. "Leave us," he said. Jared fidgeted. "Just remember what we talked about. Now." With one last pleading glance at Selena, Jared slipped back into the elevator. The door closed, leaving only silence. Selena's heart pounded. Damien didn't move, not at first. When he finally turned, the full weight of his gaze hit her like a current. His eyes were a striking steel grey, cool and assessing, set against sharp cheekbones and a mouth that didn't smile. "You're more beautiful in person," he said simply. She didn't know what to say. "Why am I here?" He walked towards her slowly, like someone who never rushed for anything. "Because your brother owes a great deal of money to people who would not hesitate to collect with blood. And he came to me, the only man who could save him." Selena crossed her arms. "And what, you decided to play hero?" "No," Damien said calmly. "I don't believe in heroism. I believe in transactions. Your brother offered something he thought might be valuable to me." The pause that followed was unbearable. "Me." "Yes." Her breath caught in her throat. "That's human trafficking." "I prefer to call it an arrangement," he replied, his voice silk over steel. "I offered to erase his debt. In return, he assured me that you would consider becoming part of my life. Publicly, you would be my companion, my fiancé if necessary. Privately," he paused, letting the implication hang. "I'm not for sale," Selena said, her voice low but steady. Damien's gaze didn't waver. "Everyone has a price, Miss Clark, even if that price isn't money." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Selena unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a medical bill for her mother's hospice care, long unpaid. Final notice stamped in red at the bottom. Her eyes welled with tears. How do you even have this? I make it my business to know everything about those I invest in, he said quietly. You've spent the last year trying to pay this off. Working nights, skipping classes, sacrificing everything. You could do it for another 5 years and still not come close. She looked up at him, fury rising. So what's your offer exactly? 1 year, Damien said. You move in with me. Attend events. Smile when needed. I get what I want. Stability, predictability, companionship on my terms. In return, your debts disappear. Your education is funded. Your future is secured. No strings you haven't agreed to. Selena laughed bitterly. Except the one where you own me. I don't want to own you, he said, stepping closer. I want to control the chaos in my life. And you, Selena Clark, are the first person I've met who might be capable of grounding that storm. His proximity set off something in her. A strange, dangerous awareness. Her body, traitorous, reacted to his nearness. Her mind screamed in protest. This is insane. Is it? Damien's voice was soft now. What do you really have to lose? Selena didn't respond. She was still holding the bill, her fingers trembling. Take the night, Damien said. Think about it. I'll send a car tomorrow. If you come, I'll know your answer. If you don't, everything reverts to what it was. Except your brother will no longer be safe, and your mother's debt will continue to grow. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the vast echoing penthouse. Selena stood frozen, the lights of the city reflecting in her eyes like stars she couldn't reach. Outside, the storm finally broke. Rain lashed against the windows, a furious wind rattling the glass. Inside, a woman stood on the edge of a decision that would change everything. The next morning dawned grey and cold, the kind of light that made everything outside Selena's window look washed out and unfamiliar. She hadn't slept. She'd lain awake on the narrow mattress in her one-bedroom apartment, listening to the leaking faucet drip, drip, drip into the cracked porcelain sink. Every sound felt magnified, as if the silence itself was trying to pull her under. She'd stared at the medical bill Damien had handed her, reading it over and over again as though something might change. But the numbers were always the same. Unpayable, immovable, a relic of her mother's final days and the system that never gave anyone like them a break. The knock came at precisely 9 a.m. A black car idled outside her building, polished too. A mirror shine with a driver who didn't speak but offered her the warmth of the back seat like it was sanctuary. Selena didn't remember making the choice to get in. It felt more like surrender than decision, like letting herself drift into a current too strong to resist. The city blurred past the tinted windows. Buildings she knew intimately from her walks to work now looked foreign, like parts of someone else's life. Selena watched them slip by, her fingers clutched tightly around the strap of her duffel bag, the only thing she'd brought. When the car stopped in front of Lancaster Tower, her heart kicked hard in her chest. The doorman nodded. Politely, the elevator whooshed upward with a soft hum. Every detail felt surreal, like she was stepping into a dream she didn't ask for. Damien was waiting when the doors opened, dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, his expression unreadable. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. I wasn't either, she replied. He stepped aside, motioning her into the penthouse. I hope you'll find it comfortable. Selena walked slowly through the space. It was exactly as she remembered. Clean lines, cold elegance, a view that looked like it belonged in a movie. But now it felt different. Now it belonged, at least in part, to her. Where should I put my things? She asked quietly. I had a room prepared, Damien said. Second door on the left. She nodded and made her way there, careful not to meet his eyes for too long. The bedroom was nothing like her own. A large king-sized bed with crisp linens, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a walk-in closet already stocked with clothes in her size. The gesture unsettled her. How much had he known? How long had this plan been in motion? After a few minutes, Damien knocked softly on the doorframe. I thought we could talk. Set expectations. Selena followed him back to the living area. He poured her a glass of water and sat opposite her on the sleek leather sofa, folding his long legs like he was used to control, always aware of space and power. I want to make something clear, he said. This arrangement does not include intimacy unless you initiate it. I will never touch you without consent. His voice was steady, emotionless. But his eyes, those storm-colored eyes, held something more complicated. Why me, she asked, the question that had haunted her since the night before. Damien's jaw flexed. Because you're not impressed by wealth. You didn't flinch in that elevator even when you knew who I was. You looked at me like I was human, not a headline. And because you need help but haven't asked anyone for it. She looked away. So this is charity? No, he said firmly. This is a deal. I get peace. You get freedom. Selena absorbed his words. They weren't comforting, but they weren't cruel either. There was something oddly fair about them. And maybe in a twisted way, she respected that more than empty kindness. Over the next few days, they fell into a strange rhythm. Damien left for meetings early, always dressed impeccably, always focused. Selena wandered the penthouse, learning its sounds and silences. There was a private library where sunlight filtered in through arched windows and a piano no one played. She spent hours there, reading books she'd never had time for before, letting her thoughts settle like dust on untouched furniture. At night, they sometimes had dinner together, usually in silence. Damien asked questions, softly with precision. About her mother, about school, about why she wanted to be a nurse. Selena answered with care, unsure of how much truth to give. She never asked about his past, and he never offered. But slowly, cracks began to show. One evening, while clearing their plates, she caught Damien in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, rinsing dishes. It was such a mundane image, this powerful man in a $10,000 kitchen doing chores like anyone else. She laughed before she could stop herself. He looked up surprised. What? I just never pictured you doing your own dishes. Damien smirked. I don't like being waited on. It makes people think I owe them something. Selena tilted her head. And you don't like owing people? I like control, he said. Debt is a form of weakness. Something about the way he said it made her chest ache, as if he wasn't talking about money at all. That night, as she lay in the massive bed meant for someone with fewer scars, Selena stared at the ceiling and wondered what kind of boy he'd been. Had he ever laughed so hard his stomach hurt? Had anyone ever tucked him in, kissed his forehead, told him he was safe? The days passed. Damien took her to dinners, to art galleries, to charity galas where he introduced her as someone important. Not just arm candy, never that, but as someone who mattered to him. His words were carefully chosen, always measured, but there was a protective edge in the way he placed a hand on the small of her back, or stood just a little closer when cameras flashed and the world took notice. Social media speculated. Headlines ran wild. Lancaster's mystery woman. From waitress to heiress, Selena hated the attention, but Damien shielded her from the worst of it. His legal team handled the press. His security team managed their movements. He created a fortress around her life that for the first time felt safe. Yet safety wasn't the same as peace. One night, when the rain returned and thunder rolled across the sky like a memory, Damien found her on the balcony, barefoot, wrapped in a throw blanket. You should be inside, he said, voice low against the wind. I like the storm, she whispered. It makes the city feel alive. He stepped closer, hands in his pockets. You're not what I expected. She smiled, sad and tired. What did you expect? Someone who would play the role, he said. Someone who would take the money and disappear when the year was up. And now? Damien didn't answer. Right away. He looked out over the skyline, his profile sharp against the night. Now I don't know what I'd do if you left. Selena's breath caught. For a long moment they stood in silence, the storm swirling around them, both of them suspended between what was real and what was imagined. In that moment something shifted. Not love, not yet, but something close. The first hint that something had changed between them wasn't spoken. It came in a look, brief, uncertain, when Damien lingered in the hallway after dinner one evening, watching her dry her hands on a towel. It was in the way his eyes held hers just a second too long, in the way his mouth parted like he was on the edge of asking her to stay, but he didn't. He turned and walked away. Selena stood in the kitchen, heart thudding with an ache she didn't understand. She had promised herself not to fall, not into the comfort, not into the illusion of what this arrangement had become. But it was hard not to see the tenderness hiding behind Damien's control, like a man trying desperately to hold his world together with threadbare string. In the days that followed, their boundaries softened. Mornings began with coffee shared, in silence, the kind of quiet that felt companionable. Damien started asking for her opinion on things, what color to repaint the guest room, what artist to feature in an upcoming charity auction. At first she thought it was a game, a way to make her feel involved, but he listened, really listened, like her answers mattered. One afternoon she found herself standing in front of the piano in the sitting room. Dust had gathered along the edges of the keys. She hesitated, then pressed one gently. The note rang out, soft and nostalgic. Damien's voice behind her nearly startled her. "You play?" She turned. He was watching from the doorway, arms folded. "I used to," she said. "My mom taught me, before she got sick. Play something." Selena hesitated. It had been years, but there was something in his eyes, a rare openness that made her sit. Her fingers trembled as she began a slow, familiar tune. It wasn't perfect. Notes wavered, timing slipped. But as the melody filled the room, something unspoken passed between them. When she finished, Damien walked over and sat beside her. "You have a beautiful touch." Selena gave a half smile. "I'm rusty." He didn't respond immediately. Then softly, "My mother played too, but only when she thought no one could hear." That was the first time he'd mentioned his mother. Selena glanced at him. What was she like? Damien's gaze dropped to the keys. Beautiful, fierce, sad. The air felt thick with memory. She didn't press him further. Some doors, she sensed, had to be opened slowly. Later that week, Damien invited her to attend a gala hosted by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She wore a gown the color of midnight, chosen not by a stylist but by Damien himself. When she stepped into the room, his eyes darkened with something unreadable. "You look..." He stopped, swallowed. "Perfect." They arrived at the event together, drawing curious stares. Damien, the elusive billionaire. Selena, the unknown woman at his side. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered. But Damien never let go of her hand. Inside, under the glow of chandeliers and soft jazz, Selena moved through the crowd like she belonged, even when part of her still felt like a stranger in borrowed elegance. Damien introduced her to CEOs, politicians, artists, always with the same reverence, always with a protective tilt to his voice. Later, when they slipped away to the rooftop terrace, she leaned over the balcony and breathed in the cool night air. The city stretched endlessly below, glittering and indifferent. "You handled that well," Damien said, stepping beside her. Selena smiled. "Was that a test?" "Everything is in this world," she studied him. "And how did I do?" He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You made it impossible to look away." Their eyes locked. Time faltered. Selena should have stepped back, should have said goodnight and walked away. But instead she asked, "Why do you let people think I'm yours?" Damien's jaw tightened. "Because I want you to be." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said, and it terrified her. She looked down at her hands, at the sparkle of the ring he'd insisted she wear to events. For appearances, he'd said. But now it felt heavier than ever. "You don't know me, Damien." He stepped closer. "I'm trying to." That night she didn't sleep. Her mind spun with the way his voice had cracked, just slightly, with vulnerability. She thought about the scars people carried, some visible, others buried deep. Damien's were layered beneath Armani suits and boardroom authority, but they were there. She was beginning to understand them. The next morning, they had breakfast together. Damien passed her the orange juice without asking, knowing she preferred it to coffee. It was a small thing, but it unraveled her more than grand gestures ever could. Later, he asked her to join him on a trip to his family's estate in the countryside outside Florence, Italy. "There's something I want to show you," he said. Selena hesitated. "Is this part of the arrangement?" Damien shook his head. "No, this is just me asking." The estate was breathtaking. Old stone walls covered in ivy, olive trees swaying in the breeze, and a vineyard that stretched toward the horizon. It was a world away from New York, from everything. For 2 days they lived like a couple without obligations. Damien showed her the vineyard where he used to hide as a boy. They walked through the garden his mother had planted, still blooming after all these years. He cooked for her one night, badly, burning the garlic bread, and she laughed, so hard she nearly cried. It felt like something real was blooming between them, fragile and unspoken. On the third day, Damien took her into the oldest part of the house, a small chapel that had long fallen into disrepair. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting colors on the cracked stone floor. He stood in the doorway, hands buried in his pockets. "My parents were married here," he said, "before everything fell apart." Selena turned to him. "Why did you bring me here?" "Because I needed you to see where I come from. And because I didn't want to be alone in this place." She crossed the space slowly, reached for his hand. "I'm here," she said. He squeezed her fingers, silent. That night, a storm rolled through the valley, shaking the old windows and drowning the estate in darkness. When the power flickered out, they lit candles, shared wine. And when Damien touched her cheek, when he kissed her like she was the only solid thing in his world, she didn't pull away. They made love on the antique bed in the master suite, surrounded by candlelight and rain. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't cold. It was reverent. Every touch, every whispered word felt like a promise neither of them knew how to say aloud. After they lay tangled in silence, hearts beating in sync, Selena turned to him. "What happens when we go back?" Damien looked at her, and for once there was no mask. "I don't know, but I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." She closed her eyes, resting her head against his chest. She had come into his world as a transaction, but now everything had changed, and neither of them knew what that would cost. When they returned from Florence, something fundamental had shifted. Between them, like a thread that had silently knotted itself around their hearts, refusing to be undone. The city greeted them with its usual indifference, but nothing about the world felt the same anymore. Selena could feel it in the way Damien looked at her across the breakfast table, in the way his fingers brushed hers when he handed her a document, or how his voice softened when he said her name. It had been weeks since Florence, yet the memory of that stormy night, the warmth of his touch, the honesty in his eyes, lingered with her like perfume on skin. But real life didn't wait for anyone's love story. Business consumed Damien again. Endless calls, travel, high-stakes negotiations. The distance between them wasn't just measured in hours or meetings. It was emotional too. He became careful again, guarded, like he was afraid to unravel the thread that now tied them together. Selena tried not to let it hurt, but it did. The vulnerability of what they'd shared clashed against the reality of what their relationship had started as. She was still technically someone who had been purchased. It didn't matter how many times he touched her like she mattered, or whispered her name in the dark. There were things he hadn't said, questions she hadn't asked, and then came the call. It was her brother Chase. His voice a mix of desperation and entitlement. He needed money more than ever before. Bad investments, rising debts, dangerous people. Selena sat on the edge of her bed, the phone shaking in her hand as he begged, manipulated, and pleaded. He reminded her in no uncertain terms that she owed him, that without his deal with Damien, she wouldn't be living in a penthouse or wearing designer gowns. "You're still mine to protect, sis," he said. "Don't forget who got you that golden ticket." That night, Selena didn't sleep. Her past, which she had tried so hard to forget, came roaring back with a vengeance. All the reasons she had ended up in Damien's world, the betrayal, the desperation, the shame, pressed heavy on her chest. The next morning, Damien noticed. "You're pale," he said, pouring her coffee. "Did you sleep?" She didn't answer, just stared at her cup, fingers tightening around the porcelain. "Selena," he said, stepping closer. "Talk to me." She looked up then, and for the first time asked the question that had haunted her for months. "Why did you really buy me?" Damien's eyes darkened. He set the coffee down. "I didn't buy you. I bought freedom. For you. From your brother. From whatever hell he put you through. But I was still part of the deal," she said, her voice breaking. "Like property." His jaw clenched. "I did what I had to. You were in danger and you were drowning." "And now," she whispered, "what am I to you now?" Damien stepped back, the weight of her words sinking in. He ran a hand through his hair, torn between frustration and the rawness of truth. "You're the only thing that feels real in my entire life, Selena." Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back. "Then why are you pushing me away?" "I'm not." "Yes, you are," she said, rising from the table. "You're building walls again, hiding behind business, behind control. I see it." He was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, Because if I let myself fall all the way and lose you, I don't know if I could survive that. It was the most fragile admission he had ever made. Selena's heart cracked at the edges. She reached for his hand, held it to her chest. You already have me, Damien. But I need to know that you're not ashamed of it. Of us. Damien cupped her face with trembling fingers. I'm not ashamed, I'm terrified. They stood there. For a long time, the air thick with unspoken fears. Then he kissed her. Slow, reverent, like trying to memorize every part of her soul. In the following days, something shifted again. Not the whirlwind passion of Florence, but a quieter, deeper intimacy. Damien began inviting her into more than just his bed, into his world, his meetings, even his home renovations. He shared stories from his childhood, from his darkest days of grief after his mother's passing, and the relentless pressure of being heir to a fortune he never asked for. Selena, in turn, shared her own stories about her mother's illness, the years she spent taking care of a family that never returned the favor, the silent sacrifices, the loneliness, and through those stories they found each other. One evening, they attended a gala hosted by the United Nations in Geneva. Damien was a keynote speaker, delivering a passionate address about global education initiatives. Selena watched from the crowd, her heart swelling with something far beyond admiration. This man, this guarded, brilliant, wounded man, was becoming hers piece by piece. After the speech, as they danced beneath the soft lights of the ballroom, Damien leaned in and whispered, I want you to be with me. Not just here, everywhere. She looked up, searching his face. What do you mean? I'm asking you to move in. Not as my guest, as my partner. Selena's breath caught. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. That night, she moved the last of her things into the master suite. It felt symbolic, like crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But it wasn't just about sharing a space. It was about building a life. But love, no matter how deep, doesn't erase the past. A week later, Chase showed up in New York, uninvited, unapologetic. He cornered Selena in a cafe, demanding to see Damien. He owes me, Chase snarled. You both do. I made this happen. Don't forget where you came from. Selena stood tall. I haven't forgotten, but I'm not the girl you sold anymore. Chase sneered. Don't act like you're better than us. You're still a deal, Selena. A transaction. She slapped him. Hard. Not just for the insult, but for everything. For years of control, manipulation, for stealing her choices. Then she walked away. Back at the penthouse, Damien could tell something had happened. She didn't need to say a word. He pulled her into his arms and held her there for a long time. That night, she made a decision. It was time to reclaim her story, to stop letting others define her worth. She started drawing again, something she hadn't done since her mother passed. Damien surprised her by converting one of the guest rooms into a studio. Light poured through the windows, and for the first time in years, Selena felt like herself. One afternoon, he stood behind her as she painted. What are you working on? She turned the canvas. It was a portrait. His eyes, his grief, his hidden joy. He stared at it, emotion thick in his throat. That's how you see me? Selena smiled. That's who you are. He kissed her forehead, then whispered, I want to build everything with you. And in that quiet room, surrounded by sunlight and color and healing, they began again. Not as a bargain, not as a debt, but as two broken souls who had finally found their home. In the weeks that followed, the emotional thaw between Selena and Damien transformed into a season of quiet blooming. Their connection had shifted into something less volatile, but more enduring, like the roots of an oak tree digging deep into the soil. Damien, once stoic and strategic, began to show moments of vulnerability that shocked even himself. He would sit with her in the early mornings, sipping coffee in silence just to be close. He'd reach for her hand during dinners, not out of obligation, but because her touch steadied him. But even with this newfound intimacy, shadows still lingered. Selena couldn't ignore the creeping doubt that still curled in the corners of her heart. She had come to Damien not through love, but through a transaction. Could anything that came after truly be real? She asked herself this question as she painted late into the night, the scent of linseed oil and fresh canvas calming her nerves. The studio Damien had built for her became more than a space. It became a sanctuary. She would lose herself in brush strokes, pouring her confusion and yearning into color. One evening, Damien walked in while she was deep in thought. She didn't hear him at first. "You always disappear in here," he said gently. She turned, a smudge of crimson on her cheek. "It's the only place where my past can't find me." He stepped closer. "Your past doesn't define you anymore." She gave a soft, bitter laugh. "Tell that to Chase." Damien's jaw hardened at the mention of her brother. "He doesn't get to touch this life you've built. He doesn't get to twist your strength into guilt." Selena sat on the edge of a stool, tired. "It's not that easy, Damien. When someone's been inside your mind long enough, their voice echoes even when they're gone." He knelt in front of her, his hands on her knees, eyes locking with hers. "Then let me be louder. Let my love drown him out." It wasn't just words. It was a vow, and it pierced straight through her. They made love that night like it was the first time again, slow, reverent, and healing. Not just bodies touching, but spirits clinging. Afterward, wrapped in the sheets, Selena whispered, "Do you ever think we could have met under different circumstances?" Damien brushed her hair back. "Sometimes. But then I remind myself that even broken paths can lead to beautiful places. And for a while, it was beautiful." Selena's art began attracting attention. A friend of Damien's in the gallery world stopped by and was impressed. An exhibit was proposed. Selena hesitated, unsure if she was ready for the spotlight, but Damien encouraged her. "Your story isn't just survival," he said. "It's power. Let them see it." She agreed, quietly, nervously. As the show approached, Selena felt the weight of her transformation. No longer the girl in debt, no longer her brother's pawn. She was someone who created, who healed, who mattered. But Chase wasn't done. He began sending letters, voicemails, threats veiled as apologies. He hinted at going to the press, revealing how Damien bought her. He threatened to twist their love story into scandal. Selena didn't tell Damien right away. Part of her wanted to protect the fragile peace they'd built. Part of her was still afraid of the storm Chase could unleash. But secrets, like cracks, grow wider with silence. One morning, Damien found one of Chase's letters hidden beneath Selena's sketchpad. His face turned to stone. When she walked into the room and saw it in his hands, her heart sank. "I was going to tell you," she said quickly. "Were you?" His voice was cold but not angry, just hurt. "I didn't want to bring him between us again. Selena, he's already between us the moment you protect him more than you trust me." She winced. "It's not about protecting him. It's about protecting myself." Damien looked away, struggling. "I've spent every moment since Florence trying to prove that we're more than how we began. But if you're still living in fear of him, then maybe I failed." Selena stepped forward, her voice firm. "No, you haven't failed. I'm the Saisi, one who's still healing. But I want this. I want us." Damien softened slightly. "Then we fight this together. No more secrets." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Together." They hired a legal team, started the process of issuing a restraining order. The law moved slowly, but the act of reclaiming power ignited something in Selena. At her art exhibit, Damien stood proudly beside her as guests praised her work. Critics called it vulnerable and fierce, the story of a woman emerging from fire. Selena watched strangers admire the pieces that were born of her pain, and something inside her shifted. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. After the show, as they walked through Central Park beneath the twinkling city lights, Damien wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Proud of you," he whispered. She smiled. "I'm starting to be proud of me too." Then he stopped, pulling her close. "I've been waiting for the right time," he said, reaching into his coat. "But the truth is, every day with you feels like the right time." He opened the small box, revealing a ring that glimmered. Like morning dew on mountaintops, Selena's breath caught. Not as a rescue, not as a bargain, as equals, as partners, as the love I never saw coming. "Will you marry me?" She didn't hesitate. Yes, not because he saved her, but because together they had saved each other. In the months following their engagement, Selena and Damien slipped into a rhythm that was quieter, but no less profound. Life in Manhattan had a way of pulling people into its fast-paced current, yet they carved out their own sanctuary. Early mornings wrapped in each other's arms, silent breakfasts filled with knowing glances, and evenings spent watching the city glow from the penthouse balcony. It was a life built not on pretense, but on hard-won truth. Selena flourished. Her art not only sold, but sparked conversations. She began speaking at women's centers, sharing her story in private circles, helping others navigate the trauma of betrayal and coercion. Damien, ever her quiet support, never missed a single one of her talks. But as their lives became more public, the shadows they'd tried to outrun started crawling back. Chase, though legally restrained and legally silenced, he still had ways to stir chaos. It began with a gossip blog that published an anonymous tip: the millionaire mogul who bought love. It was vague, but close enough to their truth to ignite whispers. Selena felt the floor shift beneath her again. "I can handle this," she said to Damien one night as they stared at the screen. "It's just noise." Damien looked at her with the heaviness of a man who had built empires but couldn't control this one storm. "It's not just noise when it's your name they're trying to drag through the mud." He wanted to go public, Sue, make a statement. But Selena hesitated, not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. "If we fight every shadow, we'll never see the sunlight." Instead, she chose to reclaim the narrative herself. In a powerful article for a renowned magazine, she shared her story on her terms. She didn't name names, but she spoke of the betrayal, the debt, the purchase, and most importantly, the redemption, the love. The piece went viral. People didn't condemn her. They admired her. Women reached out by the hundreds, thanking her for her bravery. Damien watched her rise not just as an artist, but as a symbol. He had once thought he was her savior. Now he understood. She was his too. But all the public praise couldn't silence what Selena had begun to feel deep inside. A longing that went beyond healing, beyond love. A longing to create something that would anchor her forever. A child. The thought began quietly, like a whisper during a storm. But it grew louder each time she saw Damien's tenderness, his laughter when he held her niece, his steady patience even on the hardest days. One night, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Selena turned to him in bed. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Damien looked over, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think about a future with you, whatever shape it takes," she exhaled. "I want a family. I want us to grow into something even more." Damien blinked, his heart catching. For a moment he was back in Florence, staring at a woman he had purchased, not understanding the depth of what they could become. Now that woman was the mother of his future. "Yes," he said, voice raw. "I want that too, more than I ever thought I could." But life rarely follows a clean line. They began trying, hopeful and excited. At first it was joyful, planning, dreaming, laughing. But month after month the tests came back negative. Selena tried to hide her disappointment behind smiles and distractions, but Damien saw through it. One afternoon he found her in the studio, surrounded by canvases, her shoulders trembling in silence. "I feel broken," she whispered, "like I finally got my life back, and now my body won't cooperate." He crossed the room and held her, not as a fixer, but as her partner. "You are not broken. Not now. Not ever." They consulted specialists. The results were inconclusive, frustrating, ambiguous. Unexplained infertility, they called it. Options were laid out: IVF, adoption, surrogacy. Each choice heavy, layered with emotions. They chose IVF. It was grueling physically, emotionally. Selena faced hormone shots, invasive procedures, the crushing cycle of hope and loss. Damien was steadfast, always beside her, always lifting her when she faltered. Yet even he struggled with watching the woman he loved suffer through something. They both wanted so desperately. At one point, after a failed cycle, Damien suggested they pause. "We can breathe, Selena. This doesn't have to define us." But she shook her head, voice steel beneath the tears. "It already does. I can't give up on this, Damien, not yet." And so, they tried again. On the third round, the doctor called. With news. The embryo had implanted successfully. They were pregnant. Selena stared at the ultrasound screen, the tiny flicker of a heartbeat, and felt her knees give out. Damien caught her, both of them laughing and crying, overwhelmed by the miracle. Life moved into a new gear. Preparations began. Nursery designs, names, quiet midnight talks about who their child might become. For the first time, the penthouse felt less like a palace and more like a home. But even joy carried shadows. Selena's pregnancy wasn't easy. She battled nausea, fatigue, unexpected complications. During the second trimester, she was hospitalized for a scare. Damien barely left her side, sleeping on the hospital couch. Business meetings postponed without hesitation. "You're not alone in this," he told her one night, stroking her hair as machines beeped around them. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Selena smiled weakly. "Even when I'm cranky and bloated, especially then." They returned home, cautiously optimistic. Every kick from the baby was a reminder of how far they'd come, and how fragile happiness could be. In those quiet moments, Selena often reflected on her journey, from being sold like property to standing on a stage as a celebrated artist, to now preparing for motherhood with a man who had become her peace. 1. Late evening, curled up on the couch, Damien read to her from a book on parenting. She leaned against him, hands resting on her growing belly. "I never imagined this life," she said. He kissed her temple. "Neither did I, but I wouldn't trade a second of it. Even the parts where I yelled at you during hormone shots," he chuckled. "Especially those. That's when I knew you'd be an incredible mother. Fierce, passionate, unstoppable." Beffa, baby kicked then, hard enough to make them both gasp. Selena's eyes widened. Damien laughed. "See? Already taking after you." And as the city buzzed below them, as stars blinked through the glass above, they held each other. Two souls who had once collided in chaos, now cradling the quiet, extraordinary miracle of love reborn. Weeks passed, and with each passing day, Damien's tenderness deepened. He wasn't just attentive, he was present. Every doctor's appointment, every 2 a.m. craving, every sobbing moment of hormonal spirals, he was there. It wasn't perfection, but it was devotion. Selena knew that in a world where love was often performative, what she had with Damien was rare and unshakable. But not everyone saw it that way. When her magazine article continued to spread, Selena was approached by a television producer from a nationally syndicated talk show. They wanted her to speak publicly, in person, to a live audience, an episode focused on women who reclaimed their lives. It was flattering, terrifying, and validating all at once. "I think you should do it," Damien told her, watching. Her twist the invitation card in her fingers. "What if they dig into the past? What if they want names? Then you set the boundary. You own your story, Selena. You've already proven you can." With trembling resolve, she agreed. The taping was scheduled for late fall. The studio was in Chicago, and they flew out together, snow already beginning to lace the streets. Selena, now visibly pregnant, stepped onto the stage with trembling hands but a lifted chin. The host greeted her with warmth, but the questions cut close. "You were sold. You were betrayed. Yet here you are. How?" Selena didn't flinch. "I rebuilt. I found safety, love, and eventually myself. And now I'm becoming a mother. That's how." The applause was thunderous. And in the front row, Damien stood, eyes shining with unspoken pride. That night, after they returned to their hotel, she sat with him by the window, watching snow fall gently over the city. "Do you think they believed me?" she asked. He turned, to her incredulous. "Selena, you didn't just speak. You lit the fire. You told every woman out there who's ever been broken that they don't have to stay shattered." She placed a hand over her stomach. "I want our child to know that too." "They will," he promised, "because they'll have you as their mother." But the road forward wasn't all acclaim and warmth. Chase reappeared in their orbit, indirectly, but unmistakably. A podcast host known for scandal chasing released a tell-all episode titled "The Billionaire's Secret Purchase." Though the names were veiled, the details were unmistakable. Selena didn't want to engage. She wanted to stay above it. But Damien was done being silent. He filed a formal lawsuit, not just for defamation, but for the invasion of privacy and targeted harassment. The move sparked headlines of its own, but this time public sentiment was firmly in their favor. Support poured in. People saw through the tactics, the jealousy, the malice. One night, Damien returned home after a legal meeting, frustrated and drained. Selena, now in her third trimester, greeted him with a warm dinner and soft music playing in the background. "I made your favorite," she said, handing him a plate. He smiled tiredly, sinking into the chair. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble." She sat beside him, brushing a kiss on his shoulder. "You fight for me every day. Let me fight for you too." even if it's just with lemon chicken and jazz. They laughed. It was a small moment, but a grounding one. Later, after dinner, they stood in the nursery together. The crib was assembled, the walls painted a calming sea green. Tiny shoes lined the shelves and a stuffed elephant sat in the rocking chair. Selena touched her belly, then looked up at Damien. Do you ever think we wouldn't be here if not for that night in Florence? I think about it all the time, he whispered. How I almost didn't walk into that gallery. How I almost missed everything. She rested her head against his chest. I used to think love was supposed to rescue you, but now I know. It's not about being saved. It's about growing together. He held her tighter. Then we've grown a forest. And in that quiet room, with the echoes of their past far behind them, they stood on the cusp of a future they had earned. Every scar, every fight, every hard-won moment of peace had led them here. Selena closed her eyes and whispered, Come what may, I'm ready. So was he. The first snow of winter blanketed the Berkshires in a quiet white hush, wrapping everything in stillness. Inside their stone estate, warmth emanated not just from the fire crackling in the hearth, but from the cocoon of intimacy Damien and Selena had built over the months. Their child was due any day now, and anticipation settled over the household like a quiet storm waiting to break. Selena spent most mornings by the window of the nursery, sipping tea and watching the trees sway gently in the wind. Her belly had grown round and heavy, and her steps were slower, but her spirit had never felt more grounded. Damien was her constant, massaging her swollen feet, reading to her from well-worn poetry books, and whispering dreams of their child's future while they lay curled together under cashmere blankets. But peace, they had come to learn, was a fragile thing. The lawsuit Damien had filed months ago had wound its way into the courts with relentless media attention. While they avoided the internet as much as possible, it was impossible not to catch headlines. Reclusive billionaire and the woman who changed his life, splashed across entertainment blogs and tabloids alike. For every piece of support, there was a vitriolic backlash, and for every admirer of Selena's courage, there was someone dissecting her past, calling it transactional, scandalous, or worse. Selena tried to shield herself, but the weight of it began to gnaw at her in quiet, relentless ways. She would lie awake at night, wondering what kind of world she was bringing her child into. Would they be judged by their beginnings? Would her daughter, she was certain it was a girl, inherit not just her name but her pain? Damien noticed the change before she spoke it aloud. One night, while helping her into bed, he paused and looked at her with quiet intensity. Tell me what you're holding back, he said gently. Selena bit her lip, then exhaled, her voice trembling. I'm scared, Damien. Not of childbirth, not even of being a mother. I'm scared of her growing up and hearing what they say about me, about us. He knelt beside the bed, resting his forehead against her stomach. Then let her hear the truth. Let her know her mother was fierce and brave and walked through fire with her head held high. Tears gathered in her eyes. I don't want her to ever feel shame. Not for who she is, not for who I was. She won't. Because she'll have us. And we'll build her a world where truth speaks louder than gossip. It was easy to believe him in that moment. His conviction was unwavering, but the outside world had plans of its own. Just a week later, on a windswept Thursday evening, Damien received a call from his attorney. The defamation suit had taken a turn. Chase had countered, filed an injunction, supported by someone neither of them had expected. Lena, Selena's own sister. She had agreed to testify on Chase's behalf, claiming she had inside knowledge of the transaction between the brothers and Selena. It was a betrayal that felt surgical, precise in its cruelty. Selena sat in silence after Damien broke the news to her. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stared into the fire, the same flames that had once comforted her, now dancing, like ghosts in her peripheral vision. I thought, she whispered, I thought maybe one day we'd fix things. Damien sat beside her, taking her hand in his. You don't have to forgive her. Not for this. Some wounds aren't meant to be reopened. But Selena knew the pain wasn't just about Lena. It was about being reminded once again that the past she had tried so hard to escape still had its claws deep in the present. That night, her contractions started. The pain came in waves, stronger, and faster than they expected. Damien rushed her to the hospital, his hands never leaving hers. and for 14 hours they labored together, her body breaking open as her heart held tight. Their daughter, Ilara Grace Moreau, was born just as the morning sun lit the horizon. She was tiny, wrinkled and pink. But when Damien placed her in Selena's arms, she saw not just new life, but redemption. A legacy born not of shame, but of love and fierce resilience. Tears streamed down Damien's face as he kissed both his girls. "I've never believed in miracles," he whispered, "until now." In the days that followed, they retreated further into their sanctuary. Selena, focused entirely on Ilara, nursing, rocking, memorizing every sigh and coo. Damien, for all his wealth and power, learned to change diapers with clumsy tenderness, often humming lullabies under his breath as he rocked her in the early hours. But the outside world refused to stay quiet. News of the baby's birth leaked, thanks to a disgruntled hospital staffer. Headlines surged, heiress to a scandal, and photographs of Selena, taken years ago at her lowest, were plastered beside polished shots of her leaving the hospital in Damien's arms. Selena broke down that night. "I wanted her to be born free," she cried into Damien's chest. "Not already tangled in this mess." Damien, holding her tightly, whispered with steel in his voice, "Then let's rewrite the ending." The next day he made a call to a respected journalist, someone known not for sensationalism, but for truth. Together they arranged an exclusive interview, one that would air on national television, not to defend themselves, but to reclaim the narrative. Selena agreed, not for her, for Ilara. The interview was raw, honest, and unscripted. Selena spoke not just of being sold, but of surviving, of reclaiming her voice, of falling in love with a man who saw her not as a broken thing, but as a woman worth fighting for. When it aired, something shifted. The noise didn't disappear, but it changed. People began writing in. Mothers, daughters, survivors. They saw themselves in her. They thanked her for her courage. They asked how she'd found the strength to love again. Selena responded to as many as she could, sometimes with tears, always with honesty. As Ilara grew, the house echoed with laughter, again. They hosted small gatherings, made new friends, traveled to places Selena had once only dreamed of. Damien taught Ilara to say Papa. Selena sang to her under the stars. And one night, as they sat on the back porch watching fireflies, blink against the dark, Damien turned to Selena and said, "We made it." She looked at him, heart full. "We're making it. Every day." And in that moment, with their daughter sleeping in her arms and the world quiet for once, Selena knew that the storm that had once threatened to consume her had passed. She had walked through it, and she had emerged whole. In the weeks that followed Ilara's birth, Damien and Selena experienced the kind of quiet joy neither had ever known. They fell into a rhythm. Nights broken by gentle cries and soft lullabies, mornings filled with warm bottles and sleepy cuddles. Damien transformed before Selena's eyes from a stoic businessman into a man wholly captivated by fatherhood. He would wake before dawn just to be the one holding Ilara when the sun crept into the nursery, his powerful hands cradling her tiny body as if she were the most delicate thing he'd ever touched. But even in this cocoon of bliss, reality lingered. Just outside the gates, Lena's betrayal had triggered a deeper investigation into the nature of Selena's original arrangement with Chase. A tabloid ran an exposé suggesting Damien had purchased his wife. The headline stung, reducing their love to a financial transaction and implying that Selena had somehow conned her way into luxury. The coverage twisted facts, dredged up her brother's lies, and painted Damien as a man who used wealth to possess women. At first, Selena wanted to retreat, to shut out the noise entirely. But she soon realized that this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about Ilara. If they didn't stand up to the narrative now, their daughter would grow up reading only half-truths and vicious speculation. So together, they strategized. Damien's legal team moved swiftly to discredit false claims, and Selena agreed to publish a personal essay in a leading women's magazine. In it, she told her story, truthfully, unapologetically. She wrote of poverty, of being sold by her brother, of the shame that haunted her, and the man who never once asked her to be anything but herself. The article went viral within days. Thousands of messages poured in, support, solidarity, love, but also heartbreak. Women shared their own traumas, their own stories of family betrayal, of being seen as property, of being told their worth depended on what they could give, not who they were. Selena read every one she could. She cried with them. And then she acted. With Damien's support, she established Ilara Foundation, a nonprofit aimed at helping women escape coercive family situations, giving them financial independence and legal protection. What had once been a private wound became the foundation of a movement. Still, not all wounds healed easily. Lena's deposition loomed, and though Selena tried to remain strong, the idea of facing her sister in court unsettled her. When the day arrived, she wore no makeup, no designer labels, just a plain navy dress and a heart heavy with grief. Lena looked different, harder, colder. But Selena could still see the shadow of the girl she had once played hide-and-seek with in their grandmother's backyard. And for a moment, she wished things could have been different. But Lena took the stand, and her testimony was as venomous as expected, crafted with just enough half-truths to be dangerous. She painted Selena as complicit in her own sale, even suggesting she had manipulated Damien for security. When it was Selena's turn to testify, she didn't try to defend herself with anger. She spoke softly, clearly. She told the truth, how she'd been coerced, how she'd fought to reclaim her identity, how love had come not through rescue but through healing. The courtroom fell silent as she spoke. Even Lena couldn't meet her eyes when she finished. Outside, the verdict wouldn't come for weeks, but Selena already felt lighter. She had spoken her truth. Nothing Lena or Chase said could take that away. That night, as they walked through their snow-dusted garden with Ilara bundled between them, Damien turned to her. "I don't care what happens in that courtroom," he said. "You won today." Selena smiled, brushing a kiss to Ilara's soft forehead. "We all did." A year had passed since Ilara's birth, and spring had returned to Lake Como, painting the hillsides with a palette of wildflowers and soft sunlight. The waters shimmered with a serenity that mirrored the life Selena and Damien had built, resilient, steady, hard-won. The villa, once a cold symbol of wealth and isolation, had become a home. It echoed with laughter now. Ilara's giggles as she toddled along the garden paths, the gentle rhythm of dinner conversations, the quiet comfort of two people who had weathered their storms. Selena stood on the balcony that morning. Ilara nestled in her arms. The child had inherited Damien's piercing eyes and her mother's soft curls. As they looked out over the lake, Selena thought about how far they had come. There was no longer fear behind her smile. She didn't flinch when the past crept into her thoughts. Instead, she greeted it like an old wound she'd learned to live with, acknowledged but no longer in control. Inside, Damien was finalizing details for the Ilara Foundation's first anniversary gala. It was more than an event, it was a symbol of how tragedy could become triumph, of how broken beginnings could still lead to beautiful destinies. And as Damien watched his wife glide into the room with their daughter on her hip, he felt something, close to reverence. She was no longer the girl he'd bought out of guilt and obligation. She was the woman who'd taught him what love could mean. The gala was held in Milan, a grand ballroom filled with chandeliers, dignitaries, and women, whose lives had been changed by the foundation. Selena, dressed in ivory silk, stood before them not as a figurehead but as a living testament. Her speech wasn't rehearsed, it came from her soul. "I used to believe that my worth was something to be negotiated," she said, voice trembling. "That love was a transaction, and safety was something borrowed, not built. But I was wrong. Worth is something you find within yourself, not something anyone else defines. And love, real love, isn't about ownership or rescue. It's about choosing each other again and again, even when it's hard." The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous. Tears streamed down faces. Even Damien, never one for public emotion, stood with his jaw clenched, blinking quickly. Later that night, back at the villa, they sat together under the stars. Ilara was asleep inside, and for once there were no looming shadows, no unresolved grief. "I read your old journals," Damien said suddenly, reaching for her hand. "The ones you left in the study." Selena's breath caught, not from fear but vulnerability. "Why?" "I needed to understand what you went through, before me, during me. I wanted to know the parts of you you didn't think you could say out loud." "And?" she asked. "I fell in love with you all over again," he whispered. Selena leaned into him, heart full. "I used to wonder if this was real, if it could last. But now I know. You and me, Damien, we didn't just survive, we transformed." He pulled her close, his voice low against her ear. "And we'll keep transforming. That's what love does." The next morning brought news they hadn't expected. Chase had been sentenced. 20 years for financial fraud, coercion, and emotional abuse. The courtroom had heard testimony not only from Selena, but from others he had wronged, women whose voices had finally found strength in hers. Selena didn't feel vindictive. She felt free. And as for Lena, she had left Europe. No one knew exactly where she'd gone, and Selena chose to let it go. Some people healed, others didn't. It wasn't her burden to carry anymore. The final chapter of their story wasn't explosive. It was quiet, domestic, filled with new traditions and long, slow days. Damien took a sabbatical from his company, choosing instead to travel with Selena and Elara. They danced in the rain in Paris, made snow angels in Vermont, and chased Elara across sandy beaches in the Maldives. They built memories, not empires. And every time someone asked about their story, Selena would smile gently and say, "It started with a storm, but we found our calm." Because in the end, their love was not a grand gesture or a perfect fairy tale. It was 1,000 small choices. To stay, to trust, to grow. And that, more than anything, was what made it real. 3 weeks after the gala in Milan, with spring slipping into summer, Damien received an encrypted message on his private business server. One that hadn't been used in years. The sender was anonymous, the content simple but chilling. You thought it was over. But your past is about to catch up. Watch your daughter. His blood turned cold. At first he dismissed it as spam or the work of a disgruntled investor. But when Elara's favorite toy, one that never left her side, was found torn and abandoned on the front gate steps, Damien's instincts surged to red alert. He doubled security around the villa, restricted all public appearances, and sent Elara and Selena to a secure location in Bellagio, away from the press, from friends, from everything. Selena was confused, hurt. "Why are you locking us away?" Again, she whispered one night, arms wrapped tightly around Elara. "I thought we were past hiding." "I'm protecting you," Damien said quietly, shadows under his eyes. "I've made enemies before I knew how to love. Now I have something to lose." The tension grew. Damien became restless, consumed by calls, late-night meetings, surveillance footage. Selena, though understanding, began to feel the slow creep of distance return, the kind of silence that used to define them. And then it happened. One stormy night, almost a cruel echo of the night they first met, Selena received a call from Lena. "Selena," Lena's voice cracked on the other end. "You're in danger. Elara is in danger." "Lena?" Selena blinked in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "It's Chase," Lena breathed. "He never worked alone. And now he's gone. But they're still out there." "What do you mean?" "I shouldn't be calling. I've been hiding, trying to fix what I broke. But there's a man. Roman Carver. Damien ruined him years ago. And now he wants Damien's life destroyed. He doesn't care about money. He wants pain, revenge. And he'll use Elara to get it." The line went dead. Selena stared at her phone, heart pounding. She didn't hesitate. She packed a bag, woke Elara, and raced back to the villa. Storm raging outside, lightning slicing through the sky. When she arrived, she found Damien in his study, surrounded by monitors and armed guards. "You knew," she accused, clutching Elara to her chest. "You knew and you didn't tell me." "I was trying to keep you safe," Damien roared, pain etched into every line of his face. "I'm not a porcelain doll, Damien, and she's not your shield. If we're in this together." He sagged, the weight of every secret finally breaking him. "I didn't want to believe he'd come after us. I thought burying him would end it." Selena stepped closer, fire in her voice. "Then we fight. Together." That night, Damien revealed everything. About Roman Carver, the hostile takeover years ago that ruined Roman's fortune, the whispers of a syndicate behind Chase's actions, and the real reason Damien had started the Elara Foundation. 2. Balance the scales of the damage his early ambition had caused. But now the past had come to collect. They prepared. Security was reinforced, routes were changed daily, decoys were used for public sightings. But despite everything, tension clawed at them. Not from fear, but from the deeper truth they hadn't said aloud. This wasn't just about survival. It was about absolution. The final confrontation came in Rome, where the Elara Foundation was due to open its international headquarters. Selena insisted on attending, refusing to cower. She stood on the balcony before the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Elara in her arms. A man in the crowd lifted a phone. A red dot appeared on Elara's forehead. Selena screamed, But Damien was already moving, tackling her to the ground, covering their daughter with his own body. Chaos erupted. Security swarmed. The would-be assassin was apprehended, a hired pawn, with ties back to Roman Carver's crumbling empire. That night, shaken but alive, Selena sat with Damien under the Roman sky. "You saved us again," she whispered. "No," Damien said, voice raw. "You saved me, when you believed in me despite everything." She leaned her head against his. "Let them come. We'll face it all." And finally, Damien understood. He wasn't just a man protecting his family. He was a man transformed by them.